Welcome to Murder Maven's True Crime Stories, where mystery meets creativity. We are two friends with a shared love for true crime and crafting, and in each episode, we'll take you on a chilling journey through a gripping true crime tale while we get crafty making cards. Whether you're tuning in to watch or just here for the story, we've got you covered. Just a heads up, some of the topics we discuss may be disturbing, so please listen with caution. Grab your favorite drink, settle in, and join us for an unforgettable blend of suspense and art.
Hello and welcome, friends, to Killer Cards. This is episode 3. My name is Lynn, and tonight's episode I will be doing solo. Usually, my partner in crime, Wendy, is here with me, and during Killer Cards, we take turns crafting and telling a true crime story. And I love that we get to do this together. I'm a little bit bummed that Wendy can't make this, but rather than um, postpone this episode, especially since we are talking about Karen Reed and her name has been in the news and on the socials quite a lot, we decided to go ahead and I would go ahead and tell both sides. Normally, when you're catching a episode of Killer Cards, Wendy tells us all about the crime because she's very fascinated about the human aspect of everything. And then I like to tell the sort of justice of the crime and justice side of things. So I like to cover the trial and what happened to all of the people who allegedly committed the crime. And in the end, did they get caught? Did they get convicted? What all happened? Tonight it's going to be a little bit different because I'm going to do both sides. So I'm really happy to see that we already have so many people in the live chat. So thank you and welcome. Um, if you are watching on YouTube or on Instagram, because I am streaming out to Instagram as well, I hope you'll say hello in the chat if you haven't already. So awesome to see so many people already in the chat. And I have a poll going on on YouTube. So let me know in the poll, have you heard about Karen Reed and her case in general? There are 3 options in the poll. The first is that you've heard of it and you've seen at least some of the trial. That is the first trial. Or have you just heard of her by name just because, she's been in the news a lot and on social media a lot? Or have you not heard of her at all? I'm excited to know what you all think if you have heard of this case. And as I tell you the story, do let me know in the comments. If you know any more information, feel free to share it. If you have questions, feel free to ask. I'll try my best to answer, but I can't guarantee that I know everything. And if you just have me on as you're maybe crafting yourself or doing something else podcast style, if you're just listening, the entire podcast, I'm going to be talking about Karen Reed. If you are watching, on YouTube or Instagram, though you'll actually see me crafting. I'm going to endeavor to make at least one card. I'll try my best, but you're not going to hear me talk about any of the crafting. But in the description box below, if you want to know what I'm crafting with, you'll find links to that in the description box. And at the very end, I'll show you what I've managed to make, if I've managed to make anything at all. And I'll talk a little bit about the products that I'm using. Okay, so firstly, hello everybody. Solo again. Oh, hey Blossom. Well, I've never done one of these Murder Maven episodes solo. So this is a first for me. But I live stream solo every once in a while, so I think I'll be okay. All right. So, I see that is there a possibility of a future future something journaling PDF for the Mavens? Wait, Blossom, I'm not sure what that means. Case. Oh, future case journaling PDF. Yeah, we can talk about that. I'm not sure what that means, but what that would look like, but we're just getting started, so I'm not going to say no to anything really. We're definitely trying different things out, and if you're here watching, we want to make this a good experience for you all. So, yeah, definitely give us suggestions. I know Blossom has suggested some cases already, so keep those suggestions coming. From the poll, it looks like quite a few people have not heard of Karen Reed, so that's good. I'm really excited to be the one to tell you about this case. So, before we get started, let me play you this quick little clip. It'll kind of set the mood, give you the overall, gist of what's happening, and then we'll dive right in.
What was supposed to be a night of fun and drinks and hunkering down with friends before a blizzard turns into a tragedy. Officer John O'Keefe is mysteriously dead after being found outside during the blizzard.
John O'Keefe, a 16-year veteran of the department, was killed this past weekend during that powerful nor'easter.
It's not clear how he died.
His body discovered outside the Canton home of a fellow officer.
Karen Reed, hers is the hot crime name of the summer. Millions of people following her story.
Did she kill her boyfriend, a Boston police officer, or was she framed?
So that is the crux of this case at a very high level. And so the way that I think I'm going to start the story off is I want to tell you a little bit about the people involved, because there are a lot of people involved. And at the end of the day, I don't think enough is said about John O'Keefe himself. So that's where I want to start. John O'Keefe was, I think, in his 40s when this happened, and by all accounts, a very nice guy. All of this takes place in, I believe, what is a small town in Massachusetts. It's Canton, Massachusetts. And when I looked it up, I think it was 20,000, population of 20,000. And when I say he's a nice guy, he's definitely one who some folks have said, would kind of give his shirt off of his back to you if that's what you needed. But his family had been through quite a lot. So his sister passed away from a brain tumor, and his brother-in-law, his sister's husband, he passed away like within months after her death from a heart attack. And so the couple had 2 children, a boy and a girl, who all of a sudden, within a couple months' time, found themselves, without parents. And John does have a brother who I believe has a family of his own already. And John, at the time, was not married and did not have any kids of his own. And so he took his niece and nephew in, and I don't know that he ever like fully adopted them, but he basically, took them in, and I believe they were not teenagers at the time. I think at right now they probably are teenagers now, but I think they were kind of preteen, around that age. And so, for a single guy to all of a sudden be guardian parent to 2 preteen teens, is quite a different lifestyle change. But he seemed happy to do it, and, um, and so that's the kinda guy he was. I think his other brother would have been willing to do it, but I think it was just, John loved his family, he loved his niece and nephew. He kind of felt that maybe his other brother had a lot on his plate already, and so he happily took his niece and nephew in. And it also meant a bit of a career change for him because he was a police officer, and so rather than being a police officer who was, like, actively out in the field and kind of always in the line of danger, I think he ended up taking more of a desk job. And so that way, you know, the worst would not happen to him, and again, leave his niece and nephew without a guardian. Um, Sadly, that's not what happened, but not for what he was trying to prevent. He just didn't want to, leave them parentless, because of being, kind of in the line of fire. But he's who is really at the center of this, and I feel like a lot of attention is on Karen Reed and all of the other people involved in this story. But at the end of the day, a nice man, lost his life. And so for all of the attention that this case has garnered, I just want to make sure that we're all kind of remembering that aspect of it. So I will get into the case also and the double jeopardy issues. So I love that some folks are very, very up on what's happening currently with this case. So that's John. Now, let's talk a little bit about Karen Reed. She is the name that's in the news, and she's the person who is on trial for John's death. And Karen and John dated for a brief period when they were younger, and then they reconnected after the passing of his sister. And so he was already kind of guardian to his niece and nephew by the time he and Karen started dating again. And at the time that these events happened, I think they had been dating for like over a year, possibly 2 years. And so while that seems like a long time, they had not like moved in together. Certainly she was staying over at his place a lot, but she had her own career, she had her own house, she, sometimes stayed at her own place, and so they had not, like, merged assets or anything like that, but certainly, his kids or his, niece and nephew knew who she was and, spent considerable amount of time with her, and, now what was their relationship like? Hard to say. As with all relationships, I'm sure there were some ups and downs, and she, I think, even admitted to as much. But they were having some issues, though on the night that John O'Keefe passed away, Uh, it was a little tumultuous because, and we'll get into it, but some accounts said that they seemed perfectly happy, and then you'll hear later that maybe not so much. So, as with all relationships, there's ups and downs, but they were together that night. So then moving on to Brian Albert. Who is Brian Albert? Brian Albert and the Albert home or house is where John O'Keefe's body was found ultimately. And Brian, as well, is a police officer, a colleague of John O'Keefe's. They are part of the Boston police force, and that's different to the local Canton, police force. So he is a police officer. I think he was part of some show or something that made him quite notable. But the Albert family is a very established family in Canton. They've lived there for a really long time, and they had uh, you know, some would say a lot of influence in that community. And so he's somewhat involved because essentially, whether his house was a crime scene, um, for all intents and purposes, because that's where John was found, that's where a lot of this is centered. So so that's Brian Albert. Now, several of his family members are did testify during the trial. I put Jennifer McCabe on the slide here because she's an interesting person because she's actually Brian Albert's sister-in-law by marriage. So she is the sister of Brian Albert's wife. But she's also important because she was actually in the car with Karen Reed when John O'Keefe's body was found. And so she's important as a witness, as a person in this case who, had was there when kind of it all happened, at least, from the point where he was found. And so while Karen Reed, it's not really clear whether she was friends with Jennifer McCabe, but because John O'Keefe and Brian Albert were friends, um, maybe that made Karen and Jennifer McCabe sort of friends by extension, because they kind of hung out together, and you'll see more about that in a bit. Now, Brian Higgins is listed next. He is an ATF agent, and he is friends with Brian Albert. And later we'll learn that there's a connection between him and Karen Reed as well. Maybe I'll save that for a little later. Then we have Colin Albert. Colin Albert is Brian Albert's nephew. And he was at the Albert house when certain events were happening. There was a birthday party the night that John O'Keefe passed away, and so he was there at the birthday party. And he and John O'Keefe had some words with each other in the past. They were not on the best of terms. And there are theories out there posited by the defense, which we'll get into later. But I want to just get his name into your minds with a photo of him just so that you can see who he is and how he factors, but how he is related to the people involved. So while there are more people involved, I think those are going to be some kind of key people that factor into the trial later. So I'll introduce some more people later, but let me tell you what actually happened. So On the night of January 28th in Canton, Massachusetts, a group of friends decide to go out for drinks. And they went out, they were kind of bar hopping because I think by the time they went to this waterfall bar and grill, some of them were actually coming from, a different bar. They had already started their drinking at a different bar and decided to all kind of meet up at the waterfall bar and grill. And I think this was predominantly John's friend group. And it's sad that by the time John O'Keefe and Karen Reed got to the bar. In particular, I think it's alleged that Karen Reed had already done a bit of drinking because she came in holding, I think, a drink from a different bar. Like they had just walked, they had just walked over from a different bar, and so it's. I don't think they were celebrating anything in particular. There was a blizzard that was forecasted to come in. I think they just wanted to hang out. And when they were done at that bar, they had the idea, well, let's not call it a night. Let's just go back over to Brian Albert's house. I believe at the time, there was a birthday party for his son, Brian Albert Jr., and that's why Colin was there. He was celebrating his cousin's birthday because remember, Colin Albert is the nephew of Brian Albert. And so Brian Albert says, "Hey, everybody, just come back to my place, and we'll just continue the party there." So that was the plan. And everybody, however they got to the Waterfall Bar and Grill, they just kind of dispersed and made their way to Brian Albert's house. As John and Karen were leaving, Karen wasn't really too sure if they were actually included in the invitation to rejoin everybody at Brian Albert's house, because I guess maybe they had never been there before. I believe that's the case, but I don't know 100%. But she was unsure as to whether they were actually invited and if they would be welcomed if they just showed up. So in any case, though, John wanted to go, and so they drove over to Brian Albert's house. Now, Karen was still kind of not 100% sure whether she wanted to hang out with these people, whether she would be welcomed or they both would be welcomed. So she has said that she drove them to the Albert house, and she asked John to go and check if they would be welcomed in. And so she watches him walk up to the house, and he doesn't text. She's just sitting in the car waiting for like an okay, hey, they said come on in, or for him to come back to the car and then they both go home or something. But she doesn't hear from him. He doesn't text, he doesn't call to say one way or another, and she wasn't really, loving the idea of hanging out more that night anyhow, and she was starting to get really upset and kind of fuming at him because he didn't call her to let her know, like, or am I supposed to come in or what? So she just left him. She just drove on home and left him there. And later that night, or really more early into the morning of the next day, I think it was like around 4 a.m. or so, she realizes John hasn't come home, and she's starting to panic. Now, when she left him there, she was fuming and she was mad, and she let him know how mad she was. So there were a lot of text messages and voicemails that she was leaving him, calling like multiple times saying that she hates him, that he's a bastard, he's a terrible person, and it would kind of seem that maybe she thought he was hooking up with somebody else at that house. And so she was very upset, and she let it be known to him that she was very upset. And however, when she woke up to find that he was not home, because she went home to his house where, he lived with his niece and nephew. And so she realized that he hadn't come home, and she was really in a panic. So she starts calling around to all of his friends, asking, have they seen him? And one of the people that his niece calls is Jennifer McCabe. And so his niece calls Jennifer McCabe saying that Karen's like freaking out. And Jennifer McCabe has said on trial or on the stand that she heard Karen in the background, going nuts kind of as she was talking to John's niece. And they decide that they're going to go around and they're going to drive around and try to look for him. And so Jennifer McCabe, Karen Reed, and a third person, Carrie Roberts, hop in a car. I think Carrie Roberts was the one driving. And they drive around and they finally backtrack around to Brian Albert's house. And that's where I think it's Karen who, from within the car, spots what looks to be John lying out in the snow. And so she yells at, I believe it's Carrie who's driving, to stop the car, that she thinks that's John. So she rushes over, she tries to give him CPR. Somebody at some point, I don't know who, if it was Karen or otherwise, calls for the paramedics. They arrive on scene. And they do take him to the hospital. I don't think they pronounced him on the scene, so they took him to the hospital. But sadly, a few hours later, he passes away. And so I think those facts are pretty undisputed. Even through the trial, it seems like we can probably all agree to most, if not all, of those facts. But a lot more did come out at trial. And this case has garnered a lot of attention because of all of the details that have come out. So when we take a closer look at this, everybody, even the people that the prosecution called to the stand, they attested to the fact that John and Karen were lovey-dovey. Now, that's despite the fact that they've had a lot of arguments. Maybe they were on and on again, off again. But on that night, they seemed to be as in love with each other as, a normal couple of 2 years would be. Now, as I mentioned before, when the friend group had decided that they were all going to go back to Brian Albert's house, at least in Karen's mind, there was some, doubt as to whether they were invited and whether they would be welcomed there. Now, Brian Albert is also a Boston cop, along with John. And so I think whatever, this is my speculation now, I think whatever Karen was feeling was what Karen was feeling. I think she might have felt like she was a bit of an outsider. And so, because I think that John and Brian were perfectly good friends. And so maybe when she was asking, are we invited? She really meant, is she invited? Would she be welcomed there? Because I don't think, again, this is my speculation, I don't think that she particularly felt welcomed by his friend group. But when she drops John off and he doesn't get back to her, as I mentioned, she starts to get very angry and upset and left a lot of voicemails, a lot of them. And you'll see the tenor and tone of those voicemails and the captions on the slide here. And she was she was not a very happy girlfriend at the time that she was sending those texts. And so the prosecution will argue later when we get into the trial, go into that in more depth. But they're going to argue that this was not a happy couple. They were not, as in love with each other as it might seem. Now, when Jennifer McCabe, Carrie Roberts, and Karen Reed were driving around looking for John O'Keefe, Karen was saying things in the car like, "What if he's dead? What if a plow hit him?" Because by this point, a blizzard was starting to roll in and there was heavy, heavy snowfall. And apparently, she said to them that she was so drunk last night, she really doesn't remember what happened. And so one thing I think that is also undisputed as a fact was that everybody had imbibed a lot of alcohol. They were all very, very drunk. And so, so she was saying a lot of things, just positing a lot of things, wondering what could have happened to John. And so among those things, um, she did admit she so doesn't really remember what could have happened. Now, when that first responder arrived and the paramedic came, one person noted that Karen said, "I hit him, I hit him, I hit him." So that would sound like Karen confessed to maybe, hitting him somehow, perhaps with a car, perhaps, I don't know, physically, but um, this paramedic, first responder, did testify that that she heard Karen say this. And so those are the kind of introduces another set of people or who are involved. So once the body is kind of discovered, of course, police get called along with the paramedics. And so they start to try to figure out, make sense of what's happening. At the head of that is Michael Proctor, who is the lead investigator. So he's a Canton, police officer, and he's the person who is in charge of um, the investigation. Then there's a weird hodgepodge of characters on this slide, but it includes Chloe, the family dog, and she's going to factor in later, but I just want everybody to kind of see Chloe and just keep her image in mind, and we'll revisit why she might be a part of this story. And then we have also Chris Albert. And Chris Albert is Brian Albert's brother. So Chris Albert is related to the homeowner of the house where John was found. And Chris happens to be like a local elected official. They call it a selectman. I don't know exactly what that role does in a community or a town, but it kind of just goes to really reinforce that the Albert family has a lot of connections. They have lived in that town for a really long time, and they have positions of authority. So Brian Albert is a Boston cop, but his other brother is a Canton police officer. Chris Albert is the city selectman. And so those seem like, some positions with some influence and authority. And so that's just to kind of paint the picture of who all is involved. And of course, Chris Albert is shouldn't say of course, but Chris Albert is the father of Colin Albert, who I mentioned earlier is the nephew of Brian Albert and was at Brian's house to celebrate his cousin's birthday. He was the person who also was not on the best of terms with John O'Keefe, because I think at the time that this all happened, he was a high school kid. And he was a high school kid who had maybe messed around with John's house, as kids sometimes do. And so they had they had exchanged some words before, and they were not on the best of terms. And then who is Turtle Boy? So Turtle Boy is the the last person. Oh no, wait, I skipped a person. Kelly McLaughlin. Kelly McLaughlin, she is that first responder I mentioned earlier who testified that she heard Karen Reed say, "I hit him, I hit him, I hit him." And so she's the person, and I'll get into more of her testimony later when we get into the trial. But again, just want to put a face to a name because she'll factor in later. But then finally, Turtle Boy. What does Turtle Boy have anything to do with anything? Well, I just want to note him because he's a YouTuber, he's a social media kind of reporter, and it is trials are kind of open to the public to attend. So if you lived in Canton, you could just walk into the courtroom and sit down and watch the trial if you wanted. And the trial was live streamed, so that's how I watched it. So people across the country, across the world, could even watch the trial if they wanted. And so he has really um after listening to the case and everything, he's really rallied a lot of the public to feel a particular way about how this case is going. And he's been involved so much that now he is tied to a little bit of litigation involving this trial. So there's oh, this is interesting. So Kelly says, let's not forget the judge who has ties to the Alberts as well as some of the witnesses. Yeah, and it's a small, I mean, my understanding is it's a pretty small town, and so quite a lot of influence. Everybody kind of knows everybody, and so there's probably yeah. I mean, I think the defense did actually motion for her to recuse herself, and she decided she doesn't want to do that. It's weird that the judge gets to decide for themselves whether to recuse themselves. But she said, no, I think I'm gonna stick around for this one. So, but yeah, what I don't remember what her ties are. So Kelly, if you want to tell us in the chat what her connections are to the Albert family, let us know. But I do know that they did try to get her to recuse herself, and she decided that wasn't going to be what she was going to do. And more on that later, because I think maybe some of that is a little bit telling if you did watch the trial. So that's the crux of what happened. So now let's get into the trial, because I think quite a lot comes out during the trial. Okay, so let me give you a little bit of a timeline of how fast or slow our criminal justice system works. So all of this happened in January of 2022, and Karen was arrested pretty quickly in February of 2022, and there were quite a few pretrial motions and everything leading up to the trial that didn't begin until April of 2024. That trial lasted for a couple months. And if you know, the retrial um, is underway now. A little bit of a spoiler alert, but I think some folks have already mentioned it in the live chat. So if you're watching live and you're following the chat, then you've already kind of gotten a glimpse of that. So, what is Karen actually being charged of? What are the official charges against her? There are three. The first is second-degree murder. And second-degree murder, I want to give the caveat, I'm not a lawyer, but I did look up the definition, and basically it means um, that the act was intentional, but it wasn't premeditated and planned. So, so you didn't plot, for months and months. They're not alleging that she plotted for months and months to actually, um, you know, kill John O'Keefe, but they are alleging that, when opportunity presented itself, that she did it with intention. And so that is second-degree murder. Now, one of the things that and every state, I think, might do this, like, a little bit differently, but one of the things is that there are what's called, like, lesser included charges. So if you can't convict her, or if the jury does not convict her on second-degree murder, then they kind of go down the list to see if she, can be convicted of the lesser crimes. So a lesser crime is charge number 2, manslaughter, while operating under the influence of alcohol. And in this case, manslaughter is that you are responsible for that person's death, but you did not commit the act with intention. It was an accident, essentially. But it happened, and it happened because of you, and that's what she's being charged of. And then the third is leaving the scene of personal injury and death. So I didn't know that this was something you could get charged with, but apparently you can get charged with, I guess if you see somebody who, you're at the scene of a somebody has died, and you just leave, and you don't do anything, I guess you're maybe culpable. Maybe that's a crime. So those are the three charges that they levied against Karen Reed. So what was the prosecution's case? So what are they alleging happened? So they say that Karen and John were not in a happy relationship, actually. That they had now this happened in January. They had just gotten back from, I think, a trip. I believe it was to Cancun, somewhere warm and sunny, and that there were lots of fighting, and they just weren't all that happy with one another. And they allege that on that night, Karen threw a glass at him, one of the glasses from the bar that they were all partying at, and that it shattered on the ground, and it hit John. Oh, and that she, as she was leaving after, I guess, dropping him off, that she hit John with her car, thus breaking her taillight, and then fled the scene. And they are alleging that she reversed into him, like she backed into him at 24 miles an hour. So I don't know how many people watching actually, do you drive? Because reversing at 24 miles an hour sounds very frightening to do. That's really, really fast. And remember, at this time, I don't think there was like a ton of snowfall, but it might have already started to snow. And so I think that would be tough to really be reversing at that speed. But that's just my commentary. Then we have the fact that she actually said, I hit him. So she pretty much confessed to it, right? She said it. She said, I hit him. I hit him. And so, what more, what more do you need if you have a confession? And then there's the fact that there's a Google search that has a typo in it, but essentially the Google search is how long to die in the cold, which might, indicate to some people that, I don't know, she thought that this was an outcome, that she had maybe done something to, and that he could die. So she was aware that it was a possibility, and so that would mean that she kind of had the awareness of it, right? Because that is one of the things um, I think that you would need to actually prove is that you knew that this could happen, that your actions could result in injury or death to another person. And so the other thing that the prosecution put on was a lot of evidence that Karen and John were arguing a lot, that they were not happy, and that she was very jealous, Karen. That she felt like John was having an affair, and that was the motivation for why she might, in a fit of rage and jealousy, commit this crime. So that's their story. That's what they attempted to prove beyond a reasonable doubt during the first trial. So what does Karen's side say to all of this? How are they responding to these facts? Which I think if you look at it, her saying that she hit him kind of seems like that's the most damning of the facts, right? So how are they explaining all of that away? Well, let's take it one by one. The prosecution claimed that she reversed her car at 24 miles an hour and hit John, breaking her taillight. But ring camera footage of at John's house shows that her taillight is in fact intact when it shows her actually driving away to go look for him. And that she did, I think the ring camera footage also shows that she did actually like tap his car as she was reversing out of the driveway. And so um, that would seem to suggest that she didn't break her tail light with the I don't know, by hitting him, because this ring camera footage would have been after all of that went down. So there's that. And there were a lot of, and the medical examiner even talked about some of the injuries that were found on John O'Keefe. Among them are these scratches on the arm, which the prosecution alleges that he sustained those injuries after she hit him with the car. He fell onto maybe the rough concrete or ground and slid or was dragged or whatever, and that's how those scratches happened. And so you can look at those scratches or those marks yourself and determine for yourself if you think that that could be the result of being hit and falling down from a car, being hit by a car. But what the defense did was they actually kind of happened on a very well-educated, like certified. This woman, she's had quite a career. She was a police officer herself. She specialized in dog bite injuries. She worked at an ER. I think she was at some point a medical examiner herself or conducted autopsies. I mean, she was like kind of the perfect person to testify on the potentially what might have caused those injuries. And um her conclusion is that she believed those are from either dog bites or claw markings from a dog. Remember Chloe, the Albert family dog? So Chloe is a big dog. It's quite possible that Chloe might have been the perpetrator of these injuries to John. And that is certainly a theory that the defense posited during the trial. So next, now, like I said, the fact that she confessed, that she said, "I hit him, I hit him, I hit him," that seems to be pretty damning evidence against her. That's a pretty bad fact against Karen Reed. How did we learn that bad fact? Well, that bad fact came from Katie McLaughlin's testimony. Who was she again? She was the paramedic. She was one of the first responders. She's a firefighter. She was on scene. And she's the one who said that she heard Karen say this. Now, at the time that that happened, did she tell anybody that Karen said this? I mean, that seems like something you would say to somebody, right? If she is a first responder, I think first responders, I don't really know for sure, but I would think that they work pretty closely with the police, and so wouldn't she know to actually like say something to a detective, a cop on scene? Certainly, there were police officers on scene, um, but apparently at the time she told nobody this. And in there were no notes, investigative notes or any notes otherwise of from anybody other than Katie testifying to it on the stand during the trial that Karen Reed said this. So it's quite strange that this fact, isn't noted anywhere in the actual investigation. And so you have to wonder, why is it coming out now? Why didn't she tell anybody then? Even if it wasn't like immediately on the scene, because of course she has to care for John O'Keefe on the scene at the moment. But if she heard that, I would think, and maybe that's just me, but I would think that she would have told a police officer, "Hey, Karen said she did it. Maybe, that she hit him. I think, maybe you should interview her or something," right? But she didn't really actually say that. But she told plenty of other people after the fact. And so, if this was said at all, it really all stemmed from Katie. And who is Katie? Does she have any beef with Karen? Does she, why would she say this if it wasn't true, right? Well, I don't think she has a beef with Karen. However, she is friends with Caitlin Albert, who is Brian Albert's daughter. And you can see from the photos in the slide that that they've partied together. They've those both those photos are actually from the same event, I think. So, but there were multiple different outings where you could, see them together, hanging out. And on the stand though, Katie, when asked what her relationship was with the Albert family and with specifically Caitlin Albert, all of a sudden Caitlin Albert is just, well, she's just somebody, friends of a friend. She's just an acquaintance. I don't really know her that well. We don't really hang out. I don't know her. Might have some friends in common, and that's why, maybe we've seen each other or hung out, but otherwise don't really know her. Would just consider her an acquaintance. Kind of feel like if you're going like on a like friend vacation together, you're probably more than just an acquaintance, but that's just my take. And so some might say that because Kate, is it Katie? Yeah. That she was so like cagey about her relationship with Caitlin, because it's fine if she's friends with Caitlin Albert, she's friends with Caitlin Albert, um, but she was certainly trying to downplay even like knowing her much at all. And so that might lead one to think, why? Why are you trying so hard to downplay the fact that you like hang out? I mean, I think they played a sport together in in high school. And so I've never really played on a team sport, but I think when you're on a team together, at least some people find like an affinity towards their teammates, and it's beyond just being an acquaintance. So, so that seemed really odd that she was just very cagey about admitting that she knows Caitlin Albert. But one of the things that the defense said, and I think Karen Reed has done interviews on this, is that she didn't say I hit him. I hit him. She was kind of very hysterical when she discovered John, and she remembers saying, "Did I hit him? Did I hit him?" So she didn't say declaratively I hit him. She was scared that when she drove off she might have accidentally hit him and didn't realize it, because it was at night. It was like, I think, kind of around midnight, 1 a.m. or something, that that she dropped John off. And so she said, "Did I hit him?" Not "I hit him." So that's how the defense has kind of explained away that. Then we have that search, the misspelling of how long to die in the cold. And when this was investigated, it turned out that this search was conducted on Jennifer McCabe's phone. Jennifer McCabe is Brian Albert's sister-in-law, his wife's sister. And she claims that that Karen Reed is the person who told her to conduct that Google search after they found the body, which was like around 6 a.m. the next day. And so what Jennifer McCabe claims is that they drove around, they spotted the body, and Karen Reed tells her to search for how long it takes somebody to die in the cold, and that would have been at around 6, according to when paramedics and everybody were called to the scene. However, when you look at the phone records, it actually shows that search, that Google search, was conducted at 2:30 in the morning, before the body was found. before Jennifer McCabe and I think it was Carrie drove around looking for John. So why is Jennifer McCabe searching for how long to die in the cold before supposedly John's body has even been discovered? So there's some explaining to do there because it would seem that, one interpretation is that, maybe she knew his body was in the cold there and she did that search herself. So now if you ask the prosecution, what they say is that, well, that Google tab was opened at 2:30 in the morning, but the search was actually conducted at 6. I don't know how to read phone records, but so I don't know, because these are like logs and whatnot that you have to like extract from a phone. And you actually have to go to, I think they might have had to go, maybe to Google or something or to the phone to get that information. It's like all the metadata and stuff that gets saved. So that's another piece of the puzzle that's a little bit strange. And there's actually a website, so I linked to it in the slides where because there's so many people involved, it actually does a pretty neat job. I took a little bit of a screenshot here of all the connections to Brian Albert because remember all of this is kind of happening on his front lawn essentially. And so you can see he's kind of connected to, all of these different people, including Brian Higgins. Now, remember, Brian Higgins was the person at the beginning where I said there's a connection between him and Karen Reed. But he is, in fact, an ATF agent who is friends with Brian Albert. They're buddies. They hang out, they go drinking together, etc. And how does he factor? Well, he and Karen Reed had exchanged some flirty messages with one another and even shared a kiss. So while there wasn't, I guess, an outright affair of sorts, they weren't like sleeping together, but there were some flirty messages and some messages that would indicate that Karen wasn't really happy in the relationship. And she was, complaining about certain aspects of the relationship that she didn't particularly enjoy. One of them being potentially that um, John has, custody of his niece and nephew, and um, that one of their arguments that they or fights that they would get into is that John felt that she spoiled the kids. In fact, they had recently gotten into an argument about the fact that she bought them donuts. I guess he didn't want them to eat like junk, and and so they got in a fight about it, and it's a tough position for her to be in because she wants they're obviously important to John, and she wants them to like her. So maybe that's why she's kind of spoiling them a little bit. But that was one of the fights that she would get into with him, and one of the complaints that she kind of confided in with Brian Higgins that he's got these two kids. She didn't, they're not her kids. She didn't want to have kids, um, and so it was a sore spot, and they had some flirty messages exchanged back and forth, but then it kind of very suddenly kind of cooled off, and I don't know if Karen like ultimately ghosted him, but there were several like several kind of, I guess, texts from Brian's like um that sounded a little bit like, "Hello, are you still there? Are you still interested?" I mean, it was kind of sad. Um and so I don't know, there might have been like a little bit of like unrequited feelings there where maybe he was crushing on her, thought that she was crushing on him as well, but she wasn't really. Maybe she just needed like a little bit of I don't know, just an outlet to kind of, complain a little bit. So he is involved. He was there that night that all of this was happening, and you'll in the first trial, the Karen Reed's defense team, I mean, literally the opening statement was the first lines during the opening statement was Karen was framed. I mean, that's a really tall order, and the defense doesn't need to prove anything. It's the prosecution has the burden of proof, and they're the ones who are supposed to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Karen Reed committed these crimes. But that's a very bold statement from the defense to come out of the gates with. And and I think they have good reason to maybe think that happened. So some of their witnesses include scientists from ARCA. Now, this is really interesting as a twist because while all of this was going down, um, Michael Proctor was being investigated by, um, you know, it was a federal investigation. Independent of this, Michael Proctor was being investigated. And so there were specialists, and the ARCA folks are like crime scene reconstruction specialists, among many things. And they were hired by the FBI to do this investigation. And so the defense team actually wasn't the one, they weren't the ones who hired ARCA, but they were interested to learn what was in their report and the outcome of the federal investigation, which was going on during Karen Reed's first trial. It had not concluded yet, one way or another. And they were not allowed to talk about the fact that a federal investigation was underway because that might cause the jury to, make some conclusions one way or another. And so they just didn't want to have that muddy the waters any. But the defense team found the ARCA report to actually be favorable to their side, because essentially their report says that John O'Keefe could not have sustained those injuries from what the prosecution was claiming. It was just not, biomechanically speaking, it was not possible for those things to happen the way that I don't think I'll add this, the way that the prosecution was claiming. And so they've got a bit of science on their side here. They have even more science on their side in that the autopsy that was conducted by the medical examiner, even she said that the cause of death, so like medically, what caused John O'Keefe to die was blunt force trauma to the head and hypothermia. So he sustained an injury to his head and was left out in the cold and passed away from hypothermia, or the combination of the two things. The medical examiner also has the ability to opine on the manner of death, meaning, under what conditions did the death occur. And usually the what they would note as for the manner of death is either an accident. This was an accidental death. It was a homicide, like something intentionally was acted upon this person and it was a homicide, not like legally a homicide, but like medically, or undetermined. Meaning when you take into fact, into consideration all of the circumstances surrounding, the death, which of those 3 is the manner of death? Was it an accident, a homicide, or can you not tell? Well, her conclusion was that it's undetermined. So even the medical examiner who works for the state, said that it cannot be determined if this is either one way or another, can't be. So she's rather neutral, right? In terms of her finding, her final report. She says that it can't be determined if this is an accident or a homicide. And so if it can't be determined, then that means there's some reasonable doubt, right? I feel like that fact in and of itself, whether Karen Reed did this or not, you're supposed to, the state needs to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that she committed uh, this crime with intention. Because remember, the first charge is second degree murder, which means that it's not premeditated, but it is with intention that that the crime was committed. So, if the even the medical examiner doesn't say that it's an accident or one way or another, then it kind of seems like it could be one thing, it could be the other. So it's not definitive, which means that there should be some doubt or can be some reasonable doubt that it was not a homicide. So there's that. Then, and I saw this in the chat too, it was just a very shoddy investigation. So you've got in the photo there, that is their evidence bag. So if you're a true crime maven like me, you probably watch you know TV shows. And even if you've never been on an actual crime scene before, you've maybe watched plenty of crime shows, and I don't ever see anybody bagging evidence this way. So they found drops of blood in the snow, and their way of collecting that blood was to run over to a neighbor and ask for some red Solo cups. Yeah, they did that. So then they collected a few samples of red Solo cup blood droppings, but did they mark and identify where those drops of blood came from? So relative to the crime scene, it might have been useful to know that I see 6 cups in there. So if all 6 cups in there have a sample of blood, it might be useful to know where that blood was collected relative to where John was found. And maybe with one of those evidence marker things, those cups are not labeled at all. And I mean, I've watched plenty a crime show, and you don't know whose blood that is. That could have been John's. It could have been maybe somebody he got into a fight with, and there we had a little tussle back and forth, and maybe it's blood from somebody he got into a fight with who might have left him there. Maybe somebody who, I don't know, landed some blunt force trauma on his head, John's head, that is, and then left him in the cold. So we don't know. That's the thing. We don't know because um, the evidence wasn't appropriately collected or tagged. Now, here's the other thing, and that is, they really didn't investigate or interview a lot of people. Uh, I love this comment. I watch a lot of NCIS too, but the early years, the Tony and Ziva years. But so they they really they didn't try very hard because they didn't treat what they had stumbled upon. And I guess maybe you could see this from both perspectives, right? Because they didn't know that what they were looking at might have been a crime scene. I don't know what protocol is for a police officer who happens upon a scene where they find a somebody who might have passed away. At the time, I don't think they declared him dead on arrival, and so because they did take him to the hospital, and I think they were trying to do some resuscitative efforts, and so maybe they didn't actually, know or think or suspect that they what they were looking at was a crime scene, but they did 0 interviewing. They didn't even talk or go inside the home of Brian Albert, whose lawn this is happening in front of. Nor did Brian Albert or anybody inside that house, and they were inside that house when the body was found. None of them came out to see what the hubbub was. I mean, okay, picture yourself, there's sirens, there's police, there's firefighters all in front of your house. The commotion is in front of your house. Do you step outside your house to see what's happening? To ask what is going on here? Maybe you do, maybe you don't. I don't know. But nobody came out to talk to the police who was there, nor did the police knock on the doors to talk to anybody who was inside the house. I find that to be um kind of unusual, kind of odd because you would think that some conversations would be had, right? I would think that. I don't know. Maybe you wouldn't, but I would think that they would say something. Somebody would say something. And especially if you owned the home and you have like nothing to do with anything that transpired, when you I would just go out of curiosity to see what was going on. um I Yeah, smart cops would have preserved the scene in spite of not knowing whether it was a crime or not. Totally agree. But there's more. So the crime, the investigation was pretty shoddy. It almost seemed like they really had never seen or come across a crime at all. I mean, they didn't preserve the evidence. They didn't collect it very well, and there was no real tracking because you I hear often like chain of evidence and whatnot, and you're supposed to like really log who has seen anything and who has access to the evidence so that anytime somebody does anything to it, it gets logged. Anytime that piece of evidence gets passed around, it gets logged so people know exactly where it's been. But besides that, there were a lot of really suspicious behaviors. So in those wee early morning hours, there were a lot of what have been claimed to be butt dials between both Brian Albert and Brian Higgins. Remember, they're friends. Brian Albert is a Boston cop. Brian Higgins is an ATF agent. And Brian Higgins is the one who was maybe sweet on Karen Reed, that maybe they had passed, had some flirty text messages exchanged between the two of them. Well, there were a lot of calls back and forth, some that did indicate that the call was picked up, but when they were both on the stand, they said that they didn't take any of those calls. They were asleep. Must have been a butt dial. Don't know how that call got made. Don't know how that call got picked up. Then there were lots of calls, messages, texts, etc., that were deleted off of Jennifer McCabe's phone. And you can decide if this is just a coincidence or not, but Brian Higgins takes his phone. So he I think his phone was subpoenaed. It was meant to be kind of turned over. And this is Brian Higgins, the ATF agent, who was kind of sweet on Karen Reed, possibly. He, I think, had caught wind or was told, I don't know, that his phone needed to be turned over. So what he did was he went into, like, I think the police, Canton police, and he said, "Hey, do you guys need my phone? You probably need some stuff off of my phone, right? For this, John O'Keefe, Karen Reed thing." So what does he do? He takes screenshots of his, text messages, and then he just sends them over to that person as photos or images. That's not what the investigators do when they collect your phone for evidence. They look at metadata, they look at XYZ. But this is his way of turning over his phone and contributing to whatever evidence and whatnot um, needs to get, I guess, investigated in the case. And the day before he's supposed to actually turn his phone over to them, what does he do? He takes it to, like an army dumpster or something like that, and he trashes his phone there. He gets rid of his phone, but not in just, like, a regular trash can. Like, he goes to an army facility and disposes of his phone there. I mean, that's quite it's quite I mean, he went to some lengths to get rid of that phone. And I mean, coincidence? I don't know. That was for the jury to decide. Then we have, and he wasn't the only one who destroyed his phone and all of this ordeal. I think Brian Albert got a new phone. I mean, there were several people who got new phones during this time. And so that happened. And Chloe, remember Chloe, the dog, the Albert family dog? They had her for 6 years, and then they rehomed her. All of a sudden, they rehome her before the trial begins. I don't know exact time frame, but I think it was within 6 months or so of all of this going down. And she's out of state. She's in a different state. It's not like they just gave her to a neighbor or something. She's, you know, they shipped her off. Um, they they say she's, alive, and they visit her and all this and that, and they say that the reason why she was rehomed is because she had bitten somebody and she had bitten another dog. So guess what, folks? Chloe has a history of biting. That was my takeaway from that. And so, she now is no longer available for the defense to. I don't know what they would do in a case like this. Do they like um take samples of her bites to compare? Who knows? I'm not too sure. But she's not available because they rehomed her before the defense could do anything. Interview her. And they wouldn't obviously interview her, but I don't know. They might have taken some samples of something. Who knows? Um, but she's not available for that. So that happened. Then remember I said that the Albert family, they live in Canton for a really long time. Well, their house, where all this happened, their house was custom built, and they designed it, and it's built to their dreams, their desires and whatnot. Well, they sold that house before the trial started. So now, I don't know what that happens if the police even wanted to kind of revisit and actually see um what might have transpired inside the home, but they sold it, so who knows? Now it's, got new owners, and I guess it's up to them whether they would allow cops in to kind of investigate. That's if the cops even want to investigate. But so the house is gone. So that's a whole slew of really suspicious behavior of potentially, some collusion of a bunch of people who are maybe trying to cover something up, possibly. They're certainly all connected to one another, family or otherwise. And so there are a lot of things where taken individually, maybe it doesn't really mean much, but taken together would seem to suggest that, there's something shady going on. Now there's the whole idea that there are just a lot of people who were prejudiced against Karen Reed, for one reason or another. And here's a long list, if you look at it, of people who were suspended, some ultimately fired, like the lead investigator, Michael Proctor, for various things. And so on this list, you see Michael Proctor was fired. You see Kevin Albert, who is another brother of Brian Albert. He was suspended. Another lead investigator was suspended. Um, Colin Albert is the city selectman. So I think with that holds some influence. And I think somebody noted Judge Canoni herself has some ties to the family. And so there's quite a lot of people who are either, kind of rallying for the Alberts to not, you know, have any blowback, and or they just have something against Karen Reed herself. Probably the worst of them is Michael Proctor, and he's the lead investigator. You can look it up yourself. I'm not going to actually say the words that he said, but he said some pretty terrible things about Karen, including in a group chat. I mean, he's group chatting with like high school friends and whatnot, and other people on the police force, including his boss, by the way. And they're just like laughing it up, as he's saying these pretty terrible things about Karen, including the fact that he didn't find any nudes of her while searching her phone, calling her some very, very disparaging, remarks about her. She has like a chronic illness. I think she has Crohn's disease, which means that she has irritable bowel and digestive issues. And so he made some pretty disgusting remarks about that. And it included him even saying that he just wishes that hopefully she just kills herself. Pretty terrible for somebody who's supposed to be just investigating the facts and going where the facts lead you. I mean, he's saying this all about who is possibly the perpetrator, but it kind of seemed like they zeroed in on her pretty quickly and then just looked for things, possibly fabricated some things, because there were things like a bunch of pieces of missing taillight that were found mysteriously way after the fact. There was a single hair of John O'Keefe on Karen's car taillight after the car had been towed for like 60 miles in a blizzard. And lo and behold, they find a single hair of John's on her taillight, that managed to like stay on the car during that tow. And uh, Michael Proctor was ultimately fired after the first trial ended. So so he I don't know if he got any sort of um is it a pension? I don't know if he still qualifies for like a pension or anything like that. But the federal investigation, though it did wrap up, and there was nothing that came from the federal investigation. So there were no charges. There was nothing. It just ended with it was kind of a nothing burger, that investigation. That being said, it did have some interesting, kind of crime scene, uh, not reenactments, but like analysis of what happened that were valuable to, and probably will be valuable to the upcoming case, for the defense. But but he was neither like cleared of anything nor was he like charged with anything. So, um, but they did ultimately fire him. Brian Albert's no longer working as a cop either. So, there were just a lot of things where the police just really weren't interested in actually following the evidence where it would take them. And in fact, one of the text messages that was kind of passed back and forth, there was a friend in that group chat with Michael Proctor that said, "Oh man, they found a body in front of a house. Bet that homeowner is going to be under a lot of like scrutiny or something like that." And Michael Proctor's response is highlighted here. Oh, that exchange is right here. I'm sure the homeowner will receive some shit. Michael Proctor says, "Nope, homeowner is a Boston cop too," meaning, you know, they're not gonna, you know, I don't know what that could mean. I mean, maybe it could mean, hey, a cop would never do such a thing, but you could certainly take that to mean, we protect, we protect our brethren, right? So, there is that blue wall, as a lot of people sometimes call it. And so whatever was gonna happen, nothing was certainly, by the looks of that text, nothing was ever gonna blow back onto Brian Albert. And so there was a lot that was kind of protecting him, right? In spite of, um, even just inquiry, like there was zero inquiry, into, uh, what was happening or any other lines of, potential theories of what could happen. And what does the defense say they think actually happened? Well, what they think happened was that John O'Keefe and, some combination of Brian Higgins, Brian Albert, and Colin Albert, just got into a fight, that they fought, that, it transpired in the Albert home because John O'Keefe's phone actually registered that he like went up, some certain amount of steps or whatever, like in elevation. So it would suggest that he went either up or down some stairs, um, and wasn't just at ground level, that whole time. So the fact that your phone can track that, is kind of incredible. I didn't really know that. So so they know that sometime during the night, it's not like he was at, like, the ground level of the lawn the whole night or, first floor, what would be the first floor, but that he had gone, I think it was downstairs or upstairs, I'm not sure, but he had traveled up or downstairs. So that would suggest that he actually did go inside the house where Brian Albert and Colin Albert and everybody, all the Alberts and related friends and family to the Alberts said that John never entered the house. And but the defense says, they've got that phone that says that, well, he went up and down some elevation. So their theory is that, they got into a fight and maybe they like tossed John out of the house, kind of just threw him out in the lawn or whatever, and they didn't care what happened to him. And maybe they didn't mean to for him to die or anything, but they certainly didn't care enough about him to like put him in a cab or something or whatever. They just that's That's the theory of the defense. So, besides all of that, even the prosecution has been playing some games with the evidence in this case. So there's some films, there's some video surveillance camera footage of where Karen's car was towed to um, for, additional kind of investigative like, inspection or whatever. When that video was played for the jury, um, it was actually that camera was it was the video footage was like flipped, it was mirrored. And so the whole time when the prosecution was claiming, see, nobody went near that taillight that they claim was broken from when Karen hit John, but they were referring to it. I can't remember if it was on the right taillight or the left taillight. But they kept referring to, let's say it was the right taillight, I could be wrong, but let's say it was the right taillight, so they would say, "You can see nobody even goes near the right taillight." Well, the video footage had been flipped, so what was left is now right, and what was right was now left. And so it was deceptive. And then besides that, that particular video footage was never even turned over in full. They just played just clips of it. And so, even the prosecution was just like kind of trickling. I mean, even on the day of and during the trial, they were still handing over evidence that they planned to um put on to prove their case. And it's my understanding, I'm not a lawyer, but it's my understanding that the prosecution has to let the defense know, what they're planning, to how they're planning to prove their case and whatnot. It doesn't necessarily have to go the other way for certain things, but certainly you're supposed to kind of hand over the evidence that you plan to present. And there are some exceptions, like if you only just found it, but it just seemed like there was a lot of shadiness going on there as well. And even though they said that all of that surveillance footage automatically like erases or gets overwritten within 30 days or whatever, and we're long past 30 days since that original footage was recorded. um they said that they don't have the full footage anymore. They don't have, and I one of the things that I came to learn is that, when they're investigating video or anything, they actually look at the metadata to see if the what's being presented has is the actual true like original, or has it been altered in any way, because whenever a program like touches, say a video file, there's a digital footprint essentially that is left that lets people know what was transpired if they cared to actually investigate it. So lots of things all around that I feel, were mishandled. So ultimately, what happened when the jury deliberated? There were 4 days of deliberation, and ultimately a mistrial was declared because the 12 jurors who deliberated could not unanimously come to a decision on those 3 charges. Now, after the mistrial was declared, the some jurors reached out to the defense team or spoke in, like um, Facebook groups or friend groups and social media and stuff like that. And they said that in actuality, the jurors, all 12, unanimously agreed that Karen was innocent of 2 out of the 3 charges. They felt she was innocent of the first charge, which was the worst of them, right? That was the manslaughter charge, meaning that she committed the crime. It was not premeditated, but it was with intent, not an accident. They cleared her of that. All 12 of them agreed that she was innocent of that and that she was innocent of the third one, the fleeing the scene of a death or injury or something like that. And the only thing that they were hung up on that they could not agree to was the second charge, which is the one where um, essentially she's responsible, but it's an accident. So let me see the actual wording of it. So, second degree murder is the one that they felt she was innocent of. Manslaughter is the one that they felt they couldn't agree on. And I put this person's photo up because he's the juror that has been doing a lot of interviews. so so he's gone on multiple, YouTube channels, Turtle Boy's channel included, and on other like court TV channels that have been covering this trial. And he's given interviews. So he's, I believe, probably the most outspoken of the jurors. So that's why his photo is there. And he has said that basically they did all agree on those two charges that she was innocent, but they didn't indicate that on the form, and their understanding of the jury verdict form was that all 12 of them had to agree on all three charges. They didn't understand that they could also, if they agreed to any of them, that they could indicate as much. Nor were they asked either about that. Um, basically, uh, actually, the way that trials are handled here are pretty interesting because the jurors have the opportunity to actually ask questions, and they could even during the trial. So a lot of them were asking a lot of really good questions that would seem to indicate that at least some of them had some medical knowledge, had some police knowledge and whatnot. And so this was a jury that seemed like they were really paying attention. And but they found the jury verdict form confusing, and so and then no one asked them for details when they said that they couldn't come to a conclusion. He also said that all of the people who were actually on the jury that deliberated, because they did have some alternates that were dismissed before the jury went back for deliberation. But he said that everyone who had like any sort of a medical background or experience agreed that John O'Keefe's injuries were not consistent with what they have seen as being from a car, being hit by a car. And so there was quite a bit of a division on that. And remember the ARCA folks? These were the folks who were experts hired in a federal investigation completely outside and parallel to what was going on here. There was a lot of speculation as to how they became involved because neither the defense nor the prosecution could talk about the federal investigation. They weren't allowed to actually say why these people were involved, how they came to know about the case, and why they were even there. And so, what they speculated was that maybe Karen Reed's insurance paid for them, which is kind of weird. But that's for lack of having answers and being able to ask and get clarity on it, they were left to speculate. So that was their speculation. And then they figure if Karen Reed's insurance hired them, no wonder their testimony is favorable to her. So they thought that the ARCA folks were biased essentially in favor of Karen Reed. Um, yeah, Carrie, there was video evidence, and it showed that that the car, well, it showed both things, that she did tap John's car as she was backing out, and it also showed that her tail light was intact when she, drove around to go find him, when she just after she discovered he hadn't come home. This is the condition of the tail light when it was, in the evidence bay, when it had been towed back to the Sally port where they were inspecting it further. So you can see that there are all these red, the kind of covering to the taillight is all like missing, right? But here you can see it's intact because it's glowing red. Otherwise, it would be glowing white. So yeah, there was evidence of the fact that her taillight was just fine. So this was the really disturbing thing, though, that I heard out of the jurors who kind of came out to talk about this, or at least this one. He said that some people on the jury really could not be convinced, that they were kind of stuck, dug their heels in, and that they were adamant she was guilty because she was there when it happened and nobody else has been charged with this crime. And that's a very frightening, you know, thing to hear, because just because you're in the wrong place at the wrong time, that means that you committed the crime in spite of anything else the evidence is leaning towards, or in spite of, a lot of contrary, evidence that is more than reasonable doubt. So it's scary that, they actually j- felt that, well, no one else is in the hot seat, so that means she must have done it, which means that the police can put anybody in the hot seat, right? So that's really like a very terrifying thing to consider. Um, Hopefully none of us find ourselves in that position, but if you have a jury that feels that way about it, it's kind of scary. Um, so so that's what the jury in the first trial said. So where are we at now? Well, in a mistrial, the prosecution can decide if they want to just drop it, or if they want to try again, take another take another swing at it, right? And they're going to take another swing at it. So Karen's defense team, they did try to appeal the two charges that the jurors who did speak out afterwards, and it seemed like no one has said anything to the contrary. They have not polled everybody who was on the jury to verify that all 12 of them did in fact come to a unanimous decision on at least two of the charges. They didn't. They asked if they could bring the jury back and poll them, but they were denied that request. And basically, the way the justice system works is that it really has to be something pretty egregious for the appellate court to overturn anything. I mean, it really has to be like a very obvious miscarriage of justice. And so, because they want our system to work essentially, and they don't want to. I think they just don't want to admit when it doesn't work. Um, and so the state appellate court upheld the decision, and the appeal was denied. And so the case is getting appealed to the Supreme Court. And so folks had mentioned about double jeopardy. So the whole idea of what the defense is claiming and why they are taking the appeal up, because the state level, the state is all in agreement that the verdict stands. And what the defense is saying is that, well, wait, the jurors themselves have said that they did come to a unanimous decision on two of those charges, and they found that she was innocent on those two charges. So she should not be tried again on those two charges, the second-degree murder charge and the fleeing the scene charge, because that would be double jeopardy. So that's their stance. And Karen Reed's team asked for what's called a stay, where they said, okay, well, we can't do this retrial if this appeal is pending. And remember, Karen Reed, she's not behind bars. She's kind of living her life. Um, and, she's not in jail or in prison or anything. And so, a lot of times, a lot of people who are not able to, be released on bail, they're in prison the whole time during, while they're waiting for their cases to go to court and get tried and everything. But that's not the case with Karen. She is free. She's, not in prison during all of this. And so her team is asked that the Supreme Court, um, while they're deciding whether or not to take her case, because the Supreme Court doesn't actually like review all cases that get applied to them. In fact, they review very few. But they're not even going to like think about whether or not they're going to take up her case until like later in a couple more weeks, I think, later this month. Meanwhile, the retrial is underway, and in fact, I think today they just finished jury selection, and so quite possibly tomorrow begin opening statements. And so the defense team said, "Well, wait, we can't do opening statements. We can't do this retrial if it presents double jeopardy for Karen Reed on two of the charges." But the Supreme Court said, "Nope, we're not going to give you a stay. the The retrial needs to continue and proceed." So I don't know what's going to happen if the Supreme Court hears her case and then you have to do all of that. But where we're at now is I think on Friday they had 16 jurors seated. They've already lost like a couple of jurors through the process of selecting. So April 1st, the retrial started. April 1st is when they started jury selection. And so they just, I think, got to 18. And the reason why they recruit or seat so many jurors is so that, throughout the case, if somebody gets sick, if somebody has an emergency and they can't make it until the very end, they at least have enough because they need 12. By the time the prosecution and the defense are done with presenting their case, they need 12 jurors to deliberate. And so they want to build in some cushion, because if they don't have that cushion and they don't have 12 at the end, I think it's like an automatic mistrial, unless I think the defendant can waive, like they can't in some jurisdictions, maybe it's not the same in all, but in some jurisdictions the defendant can waive having a full 12, and they can let it go to deliberation with fewer than 12. But what's interesting with this new retrial is that one, there's a new prosecutor. They actually have like a special prosecutor brought in who actually was, or maybe his regular day job is, a defense attorney. But he's not from the DA's office, which there have been some some grumblings that the DA's office is not unbiased in this, and hence I think why they decided to hire somebody like a special prosecutor outside of the DA's office to try the second time around. And at this point, Michael Proctor isn't under investigation anymore, but he has been outright fired. And so I don't know what it looks like if the prosecution doesn't call their lead investigator on the case, or they call a lead investigator who's been fired for things that he said and his conduct on this case. Like, those were the reasons why he was fired, was his inappropriate texts about Karen Reed. Um, it was hinted that the prosecution also might not call the medical examiner, who, if you watch her testimony, it's kind of interesting because she clearly did not want to say anything. She was just trying to ride, that line of, I don't know what happened, which I feel like should have been enough to acquit Karen Reed if the medical examiner doesn't know what happened. um, but there's some speculation that she might not actually even be called by the prosecution, because the prosecution doesn't want her finding that the manner of death is undecided, that it's not homicide, because they're trying to say that it is a homicide. And maybe it was. It just wasn't one that was perpetrated by Karen. And then the other kind of interesting twist is that um, a juror from the first trial who was an alternate, she didn't actually deliberate. She's a lawyer and she joined the defense team. So, trial number 1, they had, I think, 18 or 19 jurors to start. By the end, they had 16 left, but only 12 actually went back to deliberate and make the decision. So there were 4, I believe, 4 alternate jurors who were essentially dismissed, and they didn't get to go back and deliberate on guilt or innocence of Karen. She was one of those 4 people who was an alternate juror who was dismissed and didn't actually, wasn't part of the final deliberation. She has now joined the defense team on Karen Reed's side because she feels that they that this is a very scary miscarriage of justice. And that, you know, all things I don't even think anyone, I don't think she actually, but she's probably not talked about it, but I don't think she's speaking from the perspective that of whether she believes Karen was, innocent or guilty, but more that the investigation was done so poorly that there's so many things that were mishandled, and that the prosecution just did not do their job to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that she is, in fact, guilty of very serious charges. And so whether Karen did it or not, I think she just feels like they didn't do a good job of proving it. They didn't do a good job of investigating it. They didn't do a good job of presenting the case. And so it's for that reason that she joined the team, because if you think about what that could mean, for everybody, that the fact that, I mean, it's kind of scary that, you know, if she is actually innocent, it is very scary that that a case that's been so like um bungled, to put it bluntly, um she came very close to being convicted, and that's kind of terrifying. So that's where we're at, and it is pretty scary. And trial number 2 is underway. Like I said, opening statements might start tomorrow, in fact. And so I guess we'll see what happens this time around, and whether the defense puts on the same Karen was framed defense. I think the jury was looking for the defense to actually prove that Karen was framed. I mean, it's not their job to actually prove what happened. It's not their job to prove that Karen was framed. It's their job to essentially present other plausible explanations for what happened. And if the jury doesn't think that those are plausible, that's when they should convict. But if plausible other explanations are being posited, and are not outside the realm of possibility, then they're supposed to vote not guilty, and they did on some of the charges. So, so that is essentially the Karen Reed trial, and the case part 1. And I feel like, even especially maybe if you want justice for John O'Keefe, I mean, the police should have done the right thing and done a full and thorough, by the books investigation, um, because he's not getting justice out of this. His family is not getting justice out of it either. And so it does nobody any good. The fact that, because if she did do it, this is pretty terrible investigation. But I feel like there were enough shady things going on that my personal belief, would love to know what your belief is in the chat, but my personal belief is I honestly don't think she did it. So it'll be interesting to see what happens next. Um, Karen says, love the emojis. Yeah, so thank you. So for folks who, okay, so that wraps up the trial part. I did make 4. These are actual cards. They don't have, like, only one of them has the inside stamped. I'll go back and stamp the insides of these. But for anyone who is curious, these fun emoji cards are from a Trinity Stamps recent release. So if you are curious, I believe, leave links to everything in the description box below. The 2 new die sets that released are the basic emoji builder and the sick and tired emoji builder add-on die set. So this gives you the basic emoji faces, and the other one gives you the yuck face. Then there's also, those are designed to actually go with this die set, which is the circle shaped card builder die set. And that's what I used as my base for everything. This originally released with a lot of donuts, other stamps and dies. And so I do love that Trinity Stamps, this was an older release, but I love the fact that they came out with something that helps us to kind of bring back some of the older releases and kind of get to use other things in our stash. And then for that inside sentiment, and for the rest, I don't know. okay, if Carrie's still here, she might be able to say. I'm not exactly sure if there was a stamp set that came out with this collection. I didn't ask for it, or I didn't get it. I actually picked these up at Creativation. Tanisa kindly let me pick out a few things for helping at the booth. And I didn't want to pick out too many things because I feel like I didn't really help out that much. But I don't know if there's a stamp set that goes with that. So I took my sentiments from this set. This is from the line of Simply Sentimental stamp sets, which I absolutely love. This one's called Hugs. So I thought that was fun. Maybe for the I think that's like a worried face. I don't know what emoji I was going for, but I love that you have all of the little pieces and that you can kind of okay, there was no stamp set. Okay. Thanks, Carrie. I love that you can cut out all the pieces and then just kind of mix and match and use them however you like. So I did cut out and use a couple different sunglass parts. So I've got a couple more sunglasses for some different emoji faces. So so that's what I used in terms of die set, stamp set, and in terms of the cardstock. These are all from 12 by 12 cardstock shop. So Karen says, personally, I like the vomit one the most. Yeah, it's pretty fun, isn't it? um Yeah, so Carrie says, "There's too much reasonable doubt for me to say guilty if I was." I'm with you, Carrie. I kind of feel like they just did not prove the case. So, if she did it, they just didn't do a good job of investigating it and proving it. And so, I think you have to vote not guilty, but it's scary that some of the jurors said, well, she's the person that was charged, and she was there. So that must mean she did it. The between the lines basically saying, well, the police would never charge somebody who, is innocent of a crime, but that happens all the time. Like you said, there are innocent people in prison. And so it happens. And it's sad that so many of them sit in prison for so long before, if ever, getting to appeal their case and getting out. Lauren says, but there was an older set that is a phone with them. Oh yeah, and I think I have that. I think that came out with the circle shaped card. So I think I have that. So I'm gonna look at that. Um, Healing Wishes does have the sentiment. Sorry, you feel like fill in the blank. I think you all know what that is. I don't think I have that one though, Carrie. So I can't dig for that. But I think I have that cell phone, smartphone set that Lauren mentioned. All right, friends, this was a lot of fun. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Killer Cards. Wendy is definitely sorry that she couldn't be here tonight, but if you join us 2 weeks from now on April 28th, uh, that's going to be episode 4. We're going to be talking about Alex Murdaugh. She might have some interesting news to share, but it's her news to share, so I don't want to say anything now. But it's pretty exciting. I'm very excited for her, and that's what she's doing now. And so hopefully 2 weeks from now she can talk about it and share that news with everybody. But thanks for joining and supporting our new channel, and thanks for hanging with me. And I don't think I've ever made 4 cards before during a live stream, let alone one where I have to do 100% of the talking. So yay me. All right, friends. I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening. Thanks again, and I'll see you 2 weeks from now. Bye, everybody.